Thanks.
All set?
Yeah. Cool. So how's everyone doing? I know it's kind of late in the day, so thanks for sticking with us, sticking with me. As Stefan said, I'm going to talk a little bit about why I think UX design has to evolve to stay relevant. But before we get into that, I'm going to, if this works, tell a little story myself. This doesn't work. Switch Bluetooth off? Thanks. There we go. So my first sort of introduction to UX user experience design happened 10 years ago. I was sort of fresh out of university, started my first design job. Went in, basically my creative director sat me down and said, James, I've got this restaurant website that I want you to build for our client. So I went in, I think what any very new junior designer would do. I took that and I just ran with it and I disappeared for like 2 or 3 days, which was the time that I had to work on the project. And I came back with a design at the end of it. At the end of these 2 or 3 days, we'd scheduled to sit down with the creative director, with some of the team. So I was going to present the work back to them that I'd done, and as you can imagine, I was super excited. I thought this was going to be like the best thing ever. I'd been slaving over this design. I thought it was beautiful. So we get into the meeting room, and I start presenting it. I'm talking them through, and I'm like, yeah, this is why I've done this is why I've done this. Isn't my design cool? And there was a few sort of comments and murmurs from the other members of the design team. And my creative director just took a minute, didn't really say anything, just paused for a minute, and then went, James, this is shit. He later went on to explain exactly why my designs were shit. I think we've heard some of the reasons why it could have been shit today. And I'll talk about that a little later through this presentation as well. So yeah, April 2008, that was around that time where I started. Like I said, UX wasn't much of a thing. It seems to have grown massively, and I think that's some of the stuff we were talking about earlier with the rapid growth and how this profession is expanding. And like I mentioned in the panel, 10 years ago, you wouldn't have filled a room this size with people that were interested in UX. So it's really come a long way. And my job title at that initial point in time was web designer, but I think I really started thinking more and more about user experience after I'd had that initial, your design is shit moment. During that time, since 2008, I've worked in various roles. Contracted for a long time, worked for different agencies, so ad agencies, marketing agencies. I spent some time working in a school, which was interesting. If you want to know who's worse, it's usually a balance between the kids and the teachers, but the teachers can be a nightmare sometimes because they don't want to change, whereas the kids have a question everything mindset. And then 3 years ago, I moved to Amsterdam. This is a picture I took from there. It's a beautiful city. It has more bikes than people, actually, which is a crazy fact. And actually, the bottom of the canals have about 1 meter's worth of used bikes in there. So I moved there to become a UX designer at Booking.com. And I've been doing that for the past 3 years. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with Booking.com. Do people here know it? Just sort of raise your hand so I can gauge. Cool. Yeah, so we actually have our headquarters in Amsterdam, which is why I moved out there for the job. We now have something like 250 designers. When I started 3 years ago, I think I was number 44. So you can see the type of growth that we've had, and I think the profession as a whole has had during this time. And one of the things that we're famous for is that we famously A/B test pretty much everything that we put on the website. And we're kind of famous for this yellow search box, which has been sort of a staple of the website for a long time. But I think that's enough about me, so what about the rest of you? Can I just sort of get a gauge of interest again? So who works in an agency, for example? Anyone? One or two people? Anyone work on a product? Yeah? Cool. What about you? What do you do? Sorry? Working, but on a product, on an app, on a agency? Cool. And yourself? What about you? You don't? You don't work? Okay, cool. Well, thanks for sharing that with me. It's cool to see the sort of differences between what people do. So there's 5 things that I'm going to sort of really talk about today, and we'll go through them step by step. Number 1 is that everything is a product. I put becoming there originally, but I kind of feel like everything is a product these days. So the apps on your phone are a product. The phone itself is a product. You'll have user experience designers working on those. Devices are changing as well, so things like Google Home or Amazon Alexa are also products, and we'll also need user experience designers to work on them. And the way that we actually connect with some of these devices is changing too. So obviously Alexa and Google Home, it's more voice. Apps could include voice, but generally you're going to use your hands like we always have. Then we're going to see other things, or we have seen other things, so virtual reality, augmented reality. And then one of the things that I see happening in the future is that this kind of technology will sort of blend into the environment. Some of these things, like augmented reality, are kind of new. But yeah, that's going to change over time. And I think through that, one of the things we're going to see is that we'll start designing less for pixels and more for information. And I actually had a recent project, or I started on the project a couple of years ago at Booking.com that was related to this. So I spent the last 2 years working on a chatbot or a messaging product for our guests at Booking. And I almost didn't work on this product, actually. So one of the managers within Booking came to me at the time, and he said, "James, we've got this team that we're forming. We want to build this chatbot." And in my head, I was kind of sat there and I was thinking, well, what is there to even design on a chatbot? It's some words and it's some bubbles and maybe some images. And obviously, the purpose of a chatbot is that we can use AI and do all this kind of stuff. So my initial reaction was kind of like, I don't really know if that's my thing. But I'm glad that I took the project on. And I was kind of right about the visual design aspect, actually. We came up with the bubbles, we came up with different card concepts and images, and that took like 2 weeks to do this and figure out what kind of components we would need and where we'd need to use them. But there was way more to actually building this chatbot than that, to be honest. And I learned that quite quickly as we went through the process and doing some of the research that we did around that. That there were different things that I had to learn. So the visual design stuff came easy, but I didn't know anything about designing a conversation, for example, which is something that I had to learn on this project. I had to learn more about copywriting. Before that, I hold my hands up. I was one of those that said, hey, this is my designer copy. Send it to the copywriter to figure something out. But that wouldn't work in this situation. I had to really think about what actually I wanted the user to do when they were trying to interact with the chatbot. And I think just working on this project in general led me to think more and more about what the user was actually doing. So why would they use this chatbot in the first place? How would they reach it? How would they interact with it? All those kind of questions came to me throughout the project. And we created sort of flows so that whenever someone did enter into the chatbot, it could have been, this was all after they had made a booking with Booking, by the way. So usually they were coming to us with questions about where they were staying. But they could still reach that through different entry points. And yeah, it made me think about, okay, if someone comes from here, what is their experience? Or if someone comes from a different place, what is their experience? And I had to start thinking about tailoring that. And I learned how impactful words can be in design. And we also had to think about things such as personality. Like, should a robot have a personality? That was a question that we asked ourselves at the start. So in the end, I was really happy that I took that project on. The second thing that I want to talk about is that research and data are more important than ever, I think. I think we've heard a lot of presentations around research today, which goes to show just how big a deal it is at the moment. And I think it's good that we all learn as designers and we know how to do research, and which types of research to do. And I'm not going to go into the methods too much because we've seen some talks around it already, but I definitely think it's something that we should have in mind moving forward. One example of that is booking is a two-sided marketplace. So we have the guests that come to booking and they book something. Then we have the hotels and the apartments and what we call our partners on the other side of that. So some of the designers that were working on our partner products actually went to work in a hotel for a day. I thought they were crazy because I spent some time working in a hotel in a ski season and I never want to do that ever again. But they didn't have the same experience as me, so they really wanted to empathize with the users of our product. So during that time, they worked in the reception, they worked with the maids, they were changing the bedding in the rooms, doing all the kinds of stuff that you would find a regular member of staff in a hotel doing. And that was all about just trying to empathize with them. And some of us actually even rented out our own apartments for a little while to see what kind of questions people would come to us with, and really try and put ourselves in the shoes of the people that we were designing for. And I think it's one interesting thing is that Booking does have a fairly reasonable budget for doing this type of research. We have our own research lab. If we can make a case for it, we can travel to do different types of research. We were able to speak to these hotels and rent our own apartments and all that type of stuff. But some of the best feedback I've had is doing some of this guerrilla-style research that Maya spoke about. So actually going into the coffee shops, going out into the street, testing basic prototypes and seeing what kind of feedback we got. And I did that when I was working on the booking assistant, the chatbot. And basically we just tried to do as much research as possible. We wanted to know what their feelings were about it. And I think just doing this kind of research, it's cheap, it's easy, you don't have to have that big budget behind you. You can just take what you've been working on and put it in front of a user and get actual relevant feedback. For me, you can't beat doing that, and I get excited every time I go out into the street with a new prototype to test it. And the point of that is that research helps us to create empathy for our users. So the more you can empathize with them, the more you can understand their problems and their thought process when they're using and interacting with your product. And that was basically what the booking designers that went to work in the hotel were getting at as well. They really want to empathize with what's it like to actually be this person and do this job, because then I can design in a better way for them. And the other thing that I mentioned is data. And data's kind of a hot word in the industry at the moment. It's both good and bad. We've obviously seen some scandals lately with Facebook and their data. But data can be a really good thing. It helps to fill in some of the gaps, and it will tell you if something works or not, but it won't always tell you why. And I wanted to find a cool photo of data, but there isn't any. So I wish it looked like this from some kind of matrix thing, but it probably looks like this, which is just a data center full of information. But it can help you make key product decisions. And one of the things it could help you with is something like this. So maybe I really like blue buttons, but you have a red t-shirt on, so maybe you really like red buttons. And we're going to argue about it forever. And I'm going to be like, no, I like the blue button, and you're going to be like, no, I like the red button. Opinions like that don't really matter, and that type of conversation isn't going to help anyone. But you can test this out, and data can tell us who clicks on which button the most, if that's what we want the user to do. And then we can figure out from there if that's beneficial for us within our product. What it doesn't tell you is why they clicked it. So that's where the two different methods can come in. So you could put that in an A/B test, for example, or you could take it into a street test and figure out why did you click this instead of the other one. And we have a really nice, I think, design principle at Booking, which is informed by data and driven by empathy. And I really like this one because there's always a lot of talk around companies being data-driven. And I don't think we should let data drive any decision that we make. It should inform the decisions that we make when we're working on products, but it really should be the empathy for the user that drives us. And I really like this quote from Margaret Stewart, who's the Vice President of Design at Facebook, who said that data can help you make a good design great, but it will never make a bad design good. And that's one of the things that I try and live by as a UX designer. The third thing that I had is that designers will need to understand the business value they provide. And I touched on this in the panel, and I think a few other people have spoken about it today as well. But understanding business is really a key thing. You have to know these days. And I sometimes refer to it as commercial awareness, but it's just having an idea of the impact of the work that you do, and things like user research and using data and A/B testing can help with that for sure. And I think when I talk about design having to evolve to stay relevant, this is one of those things, because I think if we as professionals don't know how to show the value of our work to a business, then our jobs won't exist for very long. So we have to start thinking about what business am I working for, how do they make money, and how can I fight for the user in that situation. And I think there was a question from the audience earlier about how we can show that value, or how as designers we can show value. And I really think that just understanding that impact on the business is one of the key things that we can do in that space to make sure that we do that. If we don't know if our design is better than the previous one that's there, then it's very difficult for people that aren't in the same profession to say whether something is better or not. We really have to find ways to prove that to the businesses that we work for. And we have to make those businesses feel like we're helping them make money, rather than it just being a waste of money for them instead. And if you think back to my initial story with the restaurant website design, I didn't do any of that stuff. I basically just went to a room and designed something for 2 days. I didn't think about any kind of research. I didn't know who the user was that was going to come to this website and what their reason for coming to it was. I didn't know what a successful design looked like, so I really just didn't have any commercial awareness at that point in time. Like, I didn't understand the value that I was providing to the company I worked for as a UX designer, and I didn't understand the value I was providing to the restaurant client that we had. So that's something that we really need to flip on its head. And I would rather be the one making the mistakes than everyone else. So this is why I'm putting that out there. But I think it's also okay to make mistakes. That's how we learn. And one of the questions that I ask whenever I interview designers, and I think in the last year and a half, or maybe a year, I've interviewed 100 designers that have come through to Booking, is basically that question. So how will you know if your design change is successful or not? So you could go change a complete restaurant website design like me, but how am I going to know if that's successful? What's going to tell me? Are more people looking at the menu? Is that a good thing? Or people booking tables? Is that a good thing? Like, what does the business actually want from that? And the designers that tend to get hired at Booking are the ones that they also have good craftsmanship, they can communicate well, but this is one of the key things that we look for as well. Do they have that good understanding of business value, or can they relate what they're working on back to the company in some way? And I think, whilst I'm saying this, it's not all about the business. The business has their goals, they want to make money, but as user experience designers, we should care about the users just as much as the business. That's our position, to really fight for the user in all of this. But it also means that sometimes we have to make a few trade-offs as well. So just keep that in mind. And I think one of the key ways to find more about this is to ask questions to understand the problem. And if you ask questions, even if they feel like they're stupid questions, I always feel like there's never a stupid question, actually. If you can use something to help you be more informed, then that's always a good thing. So one of the things, again, with the designers that I've interviewed in the past, is that the ones that don't tend to make it are the ones that don't ask any questions. They'll come into the interview We'll do a little challenge with them, and they will basically just go straight to ideas, or they won't figure out what the business problem is or what the underlying problem is that we're trying to solve. So I think if you can really dig deep and get to that and gather data through the form of questioning, you can really improve the designs as you move forward. I think intuition is what helps us come up with those ideas, but asking questions and figuring out like what the actual problem is that you're trying to solve is probably more important than your intuition in some cases. And I think one of the things I like in this too is just having sort of a child's mindset. And if you ever have an interaction with a child, they're always asking you questions that you probably think, why the hell are they asking me this? Like, why is ice cream white or something? And you go, I don't know, it just is. But it's that kind of questioning that I think if you put yourself in a child's shoes again and you start asking why more often or trying to dig into the situation to gather some data, you can help yourself when you're trying to solve those problems. I'm going to move on to a bit of a polarizing topic, I think. So one of the ways that I feel that we can show value to a business is not necessarily coding ourselves as designers, but understanding code better. Because if you have an understanding of coding, you can also start to have an understanding of how devices work, how browsers work, how APIs work, and all these things are going to be just as important moving forward. It also helps give you empathy for your front-end developers. And you can realize the things that they face. And it will start making you think in a more of a component mindset too. So I'm not going to say whether designers should code or not, but I think it's something to think about moving forward if you really want to help provide value to your team. And I have one example of this that I really like. So does anyone know this website, actually? It's Nomad List. Yeah, someone got it there. So I guess whoever shouted that out I didn't see will know Peter Levels, who created Nomad List. He started out knowing very little about coding, actually. And one of the things that he tried to do was start 12 startups in 12 months. And I think 4 months in, he ended up on Nomad List, which really took off, and then he made that his full-time business. But he taught himself to code through the projects he was building. And now his life looks like this, because he makes $50,000 a month. And that's all from learning to code. So he's a great person to follow if you're interested in any of that stuff. I think number 4, I'm going to ask this question to the audience. So one feature all the big products have added over the past year. Can anyone guess this one? Similar, some have done those. I was talking about something related to this in the panel earlier on. Does this help? Stories. So Instagram have added stories, Snapchat, Facebook, WhatsApp. Storytelling is something that's really going to be important moving forward. And actually, I think speaking of stories, I might just take a selfie of you guys because you're awesome from up here for my own Instagram story. So smile. Thanks. That's definitely going on my Instagram story later. And people are starting to share their stories on platforms more than ever. And I think the reason why these features have been so successful is because stories are kind of a fundamental part of human evolution. There's something within us that's wired to sort of sit up and listen a little bit more whenever someone's telling a story. And that engages with us on a product level. So we need to start thinking about stories in product terms. And I'm not saying that you have to add a story feature to your product. I think it's getting kind of saturated now. But think about how you can tell the story of your product or your brand to your users and where your users fit into that story. So designers must become better storytellers. And I think I need to work on this too. And it's something I've been trying to do more and more. And I think one of the ways that we can do this, a very quick way to do this, is within our portfolios, which I believe should be a collection of those stories. Shouldn't ever just be some visuals, shouldn't just be a case study. Share the story. Share where you fit into that story, where your users fit into that story, and use that moving forward. Talk about your designs, like how did you test them, how did you research them, how many people did you speak to, what did they say? And also, whilst you're doing that, think about what story is it that your product or your brand actually tells themselves to. So how do you connect with your users in that way? And Peter, who I mentioned before, is kind of a master of telling his stories online, I think. He basically tweets everything he does, so if you're interested in his products, if you're interested in Nomad List, you can see all the development of it live, pretty much. He often live streams his coding, which is insane to me. But he even uses Twitter to his advantage for that. So he'll use Twitter to ask his followers for product feedback, and then he'll implement features in his product through that data that he's collected. And his 12 startups in 12 months was a story in itself. So the way that he picked up so much traction from some of this stuff was just telling that story. It's, hey, I'm quitting my job, I'm going to start 12 startups, 1 a month, and he put that out in front of people. So that was his own story, but it led to a product that he now works on that makes him a ton of money. And people became invested in what he was doing because they felt part of the same story. They saw all this happening live in front of them. They're the ones giving feedback on those features. So they actually just became invested in him as much as they were invested in the product. And I think things like AR and VR that I mentioned before, I mean, I'm by no means an expert in any of this at the moment, but it's something I'm interested in. But I think this is going to take off more and more, and it's going to allow us to tell us different types of stories. So that's something that we're going to have to think about as designers as well. It's like, what are our users doing in this space? So yeah. I think on that note, virtual reality sort of brings you to the world, and augmented reality brings the world to you. So what do we want our users to do with their products, and how does their story become part of our story in that space too? And I think the better that we become at telling those stories, the better we'll become at communicating our designs as well. And communicating designs is also a fundamental part of being a designer. You could design the most beautiful thing in the world, but if you can't tell anyone anything about it, then it doesn't really matter. So it will help you in the workplace, it will help you with prototyping. I think George touched on some of this stuff earlier as well, so I'll leave it at that and move on to number 5, which is another thing that I touched on in the panel. So user experience is crossing over into the offline world. And I mentioned Disney in the panel. They're kind of, I would say they've been the masters of this for a long time, and there's often a debate online that Walt Disney was the first real user experience designer, even though he never touched a computer. And as a child, if you went to Disneyland, you'd previously go, you'd get your name on a hat, and you would walk around Disneyland, and then all the Disney characters would greet you, and you used to see like kids' eyes light up at this kind of thing. And now all of that's digital, actually. So instead of your name on a hat, you get a wristband, and whoever the character is in the area knows that you're around. They know what you like, they know what you dislike. They know if you're the kind of child that wants to be approached, or if you like them to back off. They know what kind of food you like. They could come and bring you like a Coca-Cola or something just to make that experience magical. And I think we're going to see more of this type of stuff. So they're basically using data to give you the best possible experience in that park. And cross-channel experiences like that help to deliver a coherent story. So obviously someone like Disney, they have all these movies out there that kids and adults, like I love some Disney films, they follow those stories. And I think that's just kind of a magical thing with user experience, that you could take your favorite Disney movie, go to somewhere like Disneyland, and have the characters from that story be invested in you as a person. And I think for a child, that's pretty magical, actually. And I think with the panel earlier, we were talking about this with contextual-based design, and I hope that's what Matt was getting at with that. And I think we see that as well, not only with Disney, examples such as Uber and Lyft that are digital experiences, but then the actual real interaction from that happens offline when they step into the driver's car. Places like Airbnb and Booking, where you book all that stuff online, but then it's actually the host or the hotel owner that actually gives you the experience when you get there. So being able to deliver that offline cross-channel experience is something that we really need to start thinking about as well. And I think if we can all sort of channel our inner Walt Disney there, we might be able to figure out some cool experiences for people moving forward. And you've seen this even with companies like Amazon. So Amazon have been investing in Amazon Go, which I think is really cool. I also spent some time working in a supermarket. Wouldn't recommend it. But they thought about the user experience of a supermarket and what do people hate. Like, you have to go around, do all your shopping, you have to queue at the end of it, just for some cashier to be having a bad day, so they're kind of rude to you. That sucks. So they came up with this concept for Amazon Go where you can just walk in, pick up what you want, and walk straight back out. And it's using a lot of advanced techniques behind it, so machine learning and machine vision and all that type of stuff. But I think we don't necessarily have to know how to do that type of stuff. I'll leave that to the developers, but I think this kind of user experience design is something that we should also think about. So what kind of status quos can we challenge with that would be my question to everyone. And I think what I'm also getting at with that is that good UX isn't a set of good screens, it's a good experience. So that could be online, that could be offline, it could be cross-channel. I think we need to start thinking a little bit broader than just a screen, especially with things such as augmented reality, which will put things into the world around us, possibly through a screen for now, so I'm not saying they're not important. And they're definitely not going to go away anytime soon, but it's not a set of good screens. So it's not just your flow, it's the whole experience. So I think there's some key lessons in there, and I'm going a little bit fast, so we might all be able to get out of here earlier as well. So, the first key lesson, I think, is that the tools shouldn't really matter, the users should. So I really like what Matt and Avocode are doing, actually, because it means that designers are freed up to use whatever they want, basically. And I don't have to force someone to use Sketch just because I use Sketch just so we can make this design. No, this shouldn't matter. It should be, what does the user want? And the user just really matters in all of that. It doesn't matter if I like Photoshop and you like Sketch. We can have that debate between ourselves, but we should really be fighting for the user in all of this. Because the user doesn't care if I like Photoshop and you like Sketch. They honestly couldn't give a shit. They care if the product works, they care if it makes a difference to their life, and that it helps them in some way, usually. So, yeah, big shout out to Matt for that one and Avocode. I think it's going to help just get rid of that whole debate in some way. But think about, where are your users? What are they doing? Are they online? Are they offline? Is the experience crossing over multiple channels? And I think on that note too, it's going to be design plus something else. So what that something is, I think, is up to everyone else. There's a lot of stuff to cover, and I've covered a lot of stuff here, and there's so much stuff that we can't all be amazing at all of it. So are you going to be the kind of designer that cares about virtual reality, for example, or are you going to get super into your research and make that your +1? It could be copywriting even, it could be content strategy, but it's definitely going to move forward to design plus something. Designing pixels by themselves now, it's not good enough, and I think I realized that a long time ago. But it's still something that I have to remind myself about from time to time, because as a designer, I do want to make pretty things at the same time. So yeah, I think if I can give you a few tips there, it's hook your audience with a compelling story. So demonstrate some business value and speak on the behalf of the user. And like I said before, sort of visuals alone they're not going to carry a great design forward. You need to have some understanding of the business that you're working for, some more understanding of the problem. You need to find out who those users are and actually speak to them, put your product in front of them, get real feedback. And keep pushing ourselves, actually. I think the more that we can push ourselves, the more we'll push this whole user experience roll forward too. So learning more, having that child's mindset, asking those questions that we might think are stupid at the time, but actually they get us the answers that we need to move forward. And I'm going to sort of leave that with my favorite booking value, which is think big, be brave and fail fast. And I love this one because when we say fail fast, we don't mean aim to fail. No one wants to aim to fail. But I think by doing some of these things that I've been talking about, so doing the research, gathering the data, asking questions, you will start realizing that 9 times out of 10 you're wrong, and you start becoming more humble for that. And I think that's one of the key lessons I learned from working at Booking over the past 3 years, is that I am wrong a lot of the time, but that's okay, because it's not me that's important in all of this, it's the user that's important. So thank you. Thank you.
Okay, we have a good amount of time for questions, so feel free to ask yours. Thank you, James, once again.
Thank you.